Good afternoon from the middle of Jerusalem. This is Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Delighted to be here from the JCPA with two distinguished guests. One is actually a co-host on Wednesday, Dr. Fiamma Nirenstein, one of the world's leading experts on global anti-Semitism, a senior fellow here at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. And today our special guest is another senior JCPA fellow and the director of our Center for Diplomatic and Contemporary Affairs, Ambassador Alan Baker, who was the longtime legal advisor to Israel's foreign ministry and on Israel's senior legal team at the United Nations and other international bodies. Wonderful to have both of you here. Just a brief 1-minute update. The major story today is the possible deal opposite the Hamas on the hostage exchange for Palestinian terrorists, convicted prisoners. This has been going on in Paris at the highest levels with Israel's leaders of Israel's security echelons, as well as the leaders of Qatar and Egypt, involved both intelligence leaders and political leadership. It looks like there is a 3-stage exchange that is being negotiated, which in a sense collides with Israel's stated goal that has been expressed every day by Prime Minister Netanyahu of destroying the Hamas military and governmental leadership and then returning the hostages as well. But clearly, any potential hostage deal would consequentially change the dynamic of the way this war is being prosecuted. The Israeli Defense Forces right now having closed in on Khan Yunis, which is the center of the Hamas leadership's command and control center underground. As the IDF has released, this is the Hamas has created the largest underground terror tunnel network in the world. The world has never seen anything like this 500-mile underground terror system that has taken nearly 4 months for the IDF to truly penetrate and neutralize. And it seems, according to the IDF sources we've talked to here at the Jerusalem Center, it would take another month to a month and a half, perhaps 2 months, to come into full control of the Gaza Strip. The final military piece would be Israel's necessary control of what's known as the Philadelphia Corridor, which is that corridor that separates Egypt, the sovereign border between Egypt and southern Gaza. So that is the next IDF military move. If it so happens, pending and conditional upon a possible hostage deal and a possible pause for up to a month or two or even longer of Israel's counter-terror operation in Gaza. Here we are today talking about some of the, as we do every Tuesday, the global anti-Semitism that is part and parcel of this Iran-backed Hamas operation or terror operation that began on October 7th and continues today at the end of January. And we're really delighted. I'm going to turn the show over to my colleague, Dr. Fiamma Nirenstein, who will be together with me in discussion with Ambassador Alan Baker. Fiamma, I'm passing, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Thank you. Happy to be in our Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Institute. And here I want to say that Ambassador Baker, that is one of our experts, one of the main experts of the Jerusalem Center, is the one that has really understood how the thing was going with international anti-Semitism from the very beginning, when he started describing the idea that the so-called occupation was not a real issue, but was an invented issue that has become actually the basis of all the international construction to define Israel and a state out of law, an out of law state, a state that doesn't respect the legal frame that any other state in the world has to be respectful of. So the European Union has taken measures about it, deciding that the occupation is illegal from the international point of view. view. And Baker has deconstructed this idea that has brought many political consequences. With it, afterwards come all the rest. Come the ICJ accusation to Israel that arrives to the point of defining it a genocidal state, and before that to decide that since the very beginning, this is exactly how the South African guy that started the trial said, since 75 years, Israel, according to their point of view, is violating all the international laws. And this violating all the international laws is just one of the very bases of the contemporary anti-Semitism. And this is why we are talking about it today, not only as a political issue, but also as a theoretical issue that has been going all the possible wrong way, a deceitful way of lying about the origins as a colonial state, which Israel is not, of course, as an occupying state, and nowadays a genocidal state. I mean, and all of this definition has been going through legal, so-called definition, which are actually, they are illegal, not the state of Israel. So now I pass the floor to Ambassador Baker that will explain much better than me how this process has taken all of this power and how we must defeat it. Please, Alan.
Well, thank you very much, Fiamma and Dan. It's a pleasure to participate in this webinar. What we're talking about, basically, when we're talking about anti-Semitism on the international plane, is a magnification of anti-Semitism on the individual internal plane. In other words, to single out a Jew in society negatively just because he or she is a Jew is anti-Semitism. And this has been going on for hundreds and even thousands of years. If you transpose this to the international sphere and you start singling out the Jewish state as a target for attack, whilst at the same time other states who are committing the most terrible crimes against humanity and war crimes, nobody really looks at them and only concentrates on the Jewish state. So this becomes anti-Semitism on a universal level. Absolutely. And this is something that we see, we've been talking about UNRWA. The fact that the UNRWA education system includes, to a very large extent, inciting the children against Jews. And this obviously contributes to the building up among children who later become grown-ups, the building up of a basic anti-Semitism, which later contributes to whatever activities they take, whether it's terrorism or demonstrations or whatever, taking an anti-Semitic form. But that's UNRWA, but we can also talk about what's happening in the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, in fact. The fact that Israel has been singled out in this case, by South Africa, accusing Israel of being a genocidal state, is a typical example of this singling out, because nobody has ever thought of, or maybe they've thought of it, but nobody has ever actually brought accusations against Syria or against Nigeria or against China, whose judge is sitting on the panel of judges in the International Court of Justice. Nobody has ever accused any of these countries of committing genocide or intending to commit genocide, despite the fact that, according to the International Convention Against Genocide, every state party to this convention has the prerogative to prosecute and accuse any particular state of carrying out or intending to carry out genocide. But nobody's done it. They've only done it against Israel. And this obviously raises the question of the extent to which, in this case, the state of Israel is being singled out as the Jewish state in the international community. And from this point of view, the International Court of Justice has to tread very carefully, because it's allowing itself to be forcefully brought into this trend of singling out Israel without necessarily wanting to, but it's being abused and manipulated by South Africa. But South Africa is just a front for Hamas and for perhaps Iran and various other elements who are contributing to this attempt to delegitimize Israel through accusations of genocide, through accusations of apartheid, colonialism, racial discrimination, and all these accusations. Only Israel, nobody else. And so this should light a very red light for the not just the International Court of Justice, but also the International Criminal Court, who's also being manipulated by the Palestinians into examining thousands of complaints against individual Israeli politicians and commanders, claiming that they're committing or they've committed war crimes. This is the same. It's the same principle. It should light a red light, because it's not just indicative of what's happening in the ICC or in the International Court of Justice, but in the UN itself. And nobody can deny the extent to which Israel is being singled out in the United Nations. The mere fact that the vast majority of resolutions condemn Israel, whilst virtually no resolutions discuss any other issues in the world. So this itself is indicative of the United Nations, not to mention the various agencies and organs of the United Nations, all of which basically reflect what's happening in the main organ, the General Assembly. So whether it's UNESCO or the World Health Organization, each organization will have its pet complaint against Israel. If it's the World Health Organization, so health, Israel is violating norms of health vis-a-vis both the population of the territories and Israeli Arabs, citizens of Israel. If it's UNESCO, the same with respect to universities, cultural institutions, and archaeological sites. Everything is concentrated on accusing Israel, whilst ignoring everything else that's happening in the world. And you can take the International Labour Organization and the 15 or 16 other specialized agencies and special UN bodies like the Atomic Energy Agency, where the trend is to single out Israel. But now I'd just like to make a few comments on the more basic problem. Antisemitism is nothing new, and singling out Israel, the Jewish state, it's a terrible thing, but it's nothing new. And I've been tracing antisemitism throughout the years, throughout the decades, and throughout the centuries. And whether we're talking about the Spanish Inquisition, or whether we're talking about the pogroms, or whether we're talking about the Holocaust, of course, and there's a huge list of events throughout history where anti-Semitism has showed itself in the behavior of the international community. And one of the interesting things is this: the international community has found it necessary over the years to criminalize such things as piracy. You know, piracy is an international crime. Anybody can prosecute somebody or initiate a prosecution of somebody who's involved in piracy. The same with respect to genocide. The same with respect to hostage taking, war crimes, crimes against humanity. And there's a long list of international conventions that have criminalized specific criminal acts because they're so terrible and because they violate the very conscience and the very basic norms of humanity, that it's justified that they be considered to be international crimes. Strangely enough, anti-Semitism has never been taken as a basis for being an international crime, and therefore, whether it's the International Criminal Court or any other international tribunal, there's no legal criminal basis for accusing a state or individuals of carrying out the crime of anti-Semitism. And we discussed this many years ago in the Jerusalem Center. And what I did was I decided to draft an international convention, a new international convention. And what I did basically, I took all the the UN conventions criminalizing various aspects of international behavior, whether it's piracy, whether it's war crimes, whether it's genocide, crimes against humanity, apartheid. I took all the components of these UN conventions and drafted a convention which is called the Draft International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Anti-Semitism. The aim being, first of all, to establish the crime. The crime isn't just anti-Semitism because it's too vague. You can't just say, well, because you say something anti-Semitic, you're a criminal and you can be brought before an international tribunal. But the crime that I've chosen to detail in this convention is intending or carrying out an act of anti-Semitism which is intended to cause violence or results in violence against Jews, against Jewish community. And I took the various definitions of anti-Semitism over the years, and there have been a huge amount of individual definitions, whether it's, I'm just giving you examples, the European Monitoring Center on Racism and Xenophobia, the OSCE 2004 Berlin Declaration, the US State Department 2005 Report on Global Antisemitism, the 2005 IRA Working Definition of Antisemitism, and the Coordination Forum for Countering Antisemitism in 2014. And there are many others. And I took all these definitions and built one central definition of an action or act of antisemitism intended to or resulting in violence to Jews. And we produced this draft international convention in 2015. And we published it very extensively. The Jerusalem Center published it, and we presented it to groups of ambassadors, and we presented it to the major international Jewish organizations, whether it's the World Jewish Congress, the Simon Wiesenthal Foundation, B'nai B'rith, and others, asking them, in view of the contacts that each of these organizations has with international leaders in various countries, asking them to take this convention and present it to these various countries so that they will adopt it or accept it and be prepared to propose it in the United Nations as a United Nations convention, because only states can actually propose such an international convention. And we were very optimistic that this is motherhood and apple pie. How could anybody imagine that anti-Semitism is not an international crime? And we didn't get any response. Nobody wanted to take it up. And when we asked the World Jewish Congress, well, why? What's the problem? Well, we don't want to awaken those who would want to add actions against Islamophobia. Despite the fact that Islamophobia is the fear of Islam, anti-Semitism is the hatred and the wish to destroy the Jews. It's two completely separate components. And so I put into the convention a provision distinguishing between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and stated that anti-Semitism can't be compared with any other of the various forms of discrimination or phobias, whatever they are, and has to be dealt with in and of itself, because it's a phenomenon that's existed for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years, and reinvents itself every few years. And this brings me, of course, to what's been happening since the tragic events, brutal events of the 7th of October, where in themselves, from what we saw from the terrorists who came into Israeli villages and carried out these terrible crimes, that the discussion was, well, we're killing Jews. You know, somebody called his mother and said, I've killed 10 Jews. And this I attribute directly to the result of UNRWA and other incitement in education. But this is not the only thing. What is even more worrying to me is not just this particular aspect of Hamas anti-Semitism, but this terrible wave of international Semitism that occurred immediately afterwards. These demonstrations throughout Europe, on campuses in North America, United States, Canada, mass demonstrations in London and Washington, Paris, Berlin, not just calling, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is basically a call for the genocide of the Jewish people, the disappearance of the state of Israel, but causing damage to not just to Jewish properties, but to national properties, whether it's monuments in London or monuments in Paris or monuments in Washington, D.C., outside the White House. And this has become a huge mass demonstration or reformation of a renaissance of the old traditional anti-Semitism on a huge scale. And therefore, I think that now is the time to take from the drawer our 2015 draft convention and present it again to the international community. And I think this could be done justifiably by Israel. I don't think Israel needs to sell it to any other state or organization. I think Israel is perfectly justified, in light of what's been happening, to present this to the United Nations for discussion, with a view to adopting a convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of anti-Semitism. And I'd like to see any of the major Western countries and a lot of the Eastern countries opposing this, because that in itself says something. So,
Alan, I think you're absolutely right. Now, the post-October 7th environment is, on the face of it, a perfect political opportunity in order to revisit the draft convention of 2015 that you advanced. Allow me just a 30-second observation as to why the draft convention that basically would make you sort of the startup nation of international moral clarity, why it was so difficult at that time and still remains difficult to convince policymakers, even in Israel and abroad, as to why this is not only viable, but a necessary convention. And I want to point to what my dear friend and colleague Fiamma Nirenstein has discussed in her writings, which is political anti-Semitism. The problem is that the history of the world's oldest hatred has never accepted in the modern period the notion that anti-Semitism can be wrapped in a political wrapper, and that when you move into the world of politics and international diplomatic conventions for crimes that are defined as international political crimes in the state system, like genocide, like incitement to genocide. The problem when it comes to anti-Semitism is that the point of reference for the international community, particularly in the West, has been before Israel became the nation state of the Jewish people, and therefore the crime of anti-Semitism was always well known and in its perception well accepted against individual Jews, which they thought of as or weak communities of Jews, but in a non-sovereign context. And now I think our job is going to be, with you leading and Fiamma perhaps leading this charge, is to revisit and redefine political anti-Semitism as the anti-Semitism flavor of this generation, as to how anti-Semitism should be considered. Okay. And I would suggest, I'll finish with this, that this is something that our viewers can really help us with, because we would have to have an initiative that would be funded to be presented to the Israeli government, an ideal time to do that, and then to our diplomats and our friends in the Western Alliance, because it is clearly the what we would call the draft moment of the day to have this be redefined right now. And this would be, a $25,000 initiative right now to have this published and presented. And I'm hoping that many of our friends would on this call would help earmark a particular donation for what I would call the Baker Doctrine of bringing this new draft convention on anti-Semitism. And I would ask our viewers to help us with that and earmark it so that we could present this to the Israeli government and to the international community.
Let me add one thing. One of the reasons that was given to me why in 2015 it was impossible to advance this idea of a draft convention, of a convention against anti-Semitism. One of the reasons was political correctness. Political correctness was then in its Obama heyday, and it was, the Jewish organizations and the states to which we advanced the idea of this convention. They all came up with this. Well, it's a political problem. We don't want to be seen to push this type of thing because it could be interpreted as being politically problematic. I think now this whole concept of political correctness has turned itself over, and I think today, in view of what's happening with this huge wave of anti-Semitism, that has now become, it's now politically correct to push a convention criminalizing anti-Semitism.
Yeah, we will push this forward. The Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, that's our job as the face to the international community from Israel in terms of foreign policy. And this is an issue of foreign policy for the state of Israel, no less. What do you think, Fiamma?
I think that it's a wonderful idea that we push it on, and we just update it. And when I say update it, I'm sure that it already contains every element that is necessary for a definition and for pushing up the fight against anti-Semitism. But as an observer of the debate that is taking place nowadays all over the world, because everybody are astonished by the huge wave of anti-Semitism that we have around. Okay, I can see that there are many sides, and probably this is what Alan calls political correctness, that don't like the idea that all of this anti-Semitism is the kind of new anti-Semitism that has as an enemy and as a full representative of the Jewish people, the state of Israel. Here comes a very basic point. I'm sure that this is something that is already expressed very well by the work that Ambassador Baker has done. But I think that nowadays, actually, as you say, that this aggressiveness against the Jewish people is all concentrated on the state of Israel. So what does it mean? From the point of view of who are our enemies, unfortunately, the traditional enemies that was the right side of the map has disappeared. I mean, there are not neo-Nazi or neo-fascist or neo-Nazi fascists that do this kind of things, okay? It's all the politically correct human rights side that thinks that Israel, being colonialist, imperialist, and even you know, whatever you can put there of this kind of attribution that make Israel a state which has no dignity in front of the current way of imagining what is good and what is bad, and who are the oppressor and the oppressors and who is the oppressed. Israel is always put on the side of the oppressors, and the Jewish people with Israel. So I think that this is something that we have to take into consideration, and that has probably to be, if Alan agrees, to be added to that, to the definition. What do you think, Alan, about that?
Well, absolutely. Look, what I drafted is you know, the word draft expresses that it's open for correction, for amendment, for addition of additional elements. And in fact, this is the process. Once Israel or any other state presents a draft convention to the United Nations for discussion, it goes through a very, very detailed process of consideration and redrafting. And so, you know, to begin with, it will be very important for us to receive input from those who feel that they could improve the draft or add to the draft or make it easier to understand, because it's obviously it's a legal document, so it's very legalistic. And so we would welcome this. In fact, this document was published on the website of the Jerusalem Center in 2015. I think what we'll do is, because I've added now this whole reference to the present renaissance of anti-Semitism following the 7th of October, we'll make the various additions and amendments. And I think I'm suggesting this to Dan as president of the Jerusalem Center, that we reissue this draft with the explanatory details, so that we will open it up for any comments, remarks, or amendments.
Yes, absolutely. It's a perfect timing, Alan. We will do that. I think that the Jerusalem Center is ahead of the spear on keeping the UN on notice that its past behavior, which is to be diplomatic about it, biased against Israel, and to be less diplomatic, blatantly anti-Semitic in many of its determinations, resolutions, considerations, beginning with the Human Rights Council, which has become a hornet's nest of anti-Semitism. And this we see as part of our job to enforce moral clarity in the spirit and the letter of the IRA working definition Of course, the challenge of IRA, as you pointed out, Alan, it is only morally enforceable. It is not legally enforceable at this juncture.
Well, yes. Look, the IRA definition, it's very long, and it's not sufficiently specific, in my view, in order to build up from it a specific crime. It discusses all sorts of possibility, and it's a draft definition in and of itself. Its title is a draft definition. So you know, what I've tried to do is to incorporate it in a more specific and solid manner. But clearly, we'll be open to any suggestions and amendments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would ask, I would mention to our family of viewers that Ambassador Baker is among his many responsibilities at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs is running what's called the legal Israel's legal initiative on legal rights. He's now producing together with our great supporter Robert Myers, who is kind enough to support this initiative called Israel Under Fire: The Rights and Responsibilities of Israel and Democratic States Under Attack by International Terrorist Organizations. And this UN piece would fit under the umbrella of the legal initiative, and that's why we're reaching out to our viewers and ask for your support. Fully tax deductible in the United States. It can be, you can use JGive on the site, and you can earmark it to the Baker or the JCPA legal initiative, and we will include your name as a prominent supporter in that initiative, and we will earmark those funds for this initiative specifically. Very, very important, and it will be very consequential. As our viewers know, we have direct access to the highest levels of all Israeli governments and our diplomatic corps, and everyone in the diplomatic corps knows Ambassador Baker because of his very broad and successful career, not only as ambassador to Canada, but certainly in legal circles. There is nobody more senior and more experienced than Ambassador Baker, and he is very well loved and respected by all of the most senior legal minds in Israel. So I think this is something, Alan, that as we discuss it, I become more and more excited about it, because it is such right, Fiamma, it is such an important development to advance.
You know, I think that, listening to you, in view of what's happening today, I think we owe it to everything that's happened in the past, all those Jewish communities and individual Jews who have suffered throughout the years, hundreds of years. I think we now have the opportunity to take this and push it forward for all those who haven't been able to get this type of justice. I think that this is another important point. These demonstrations are happening all the time.
Yeah,
I have a son who's teaching in London, and he travels on the underground, and the demonstrators come onto the underground and disturb the people who are sitting there with Palestinian flags and Palestinian scarves. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. So, I think now is the time. Now is the time, because this mass demonstration that's going on throughout the Western world, and possibly further far, is disturbing the local populations of the various countries in which they're living, and therefore now is the time to do this, and we owe it. We owe it to all the Jews who've suffered from anti-Semitism.
Yes, absolutely. Alan, do you think that there are international ramifications of such a draft convention for other countries? You have the Kurds, you have the Kurds, and there are other minorities that are struggling against, this type of I wouldn't call perhaps racism. I wouldn't call it anti-Semitism is unique to the nation state, the Jewish people, and the Jewish people. But do you see an echo effect by advancing this draft convention?
Well, this was one of the problems that we had with the World Jewish Congress and B'nai B'rith and the various other states. I passed it on to colleagues in Russia and in Germany and in the United States, and they all said, well, you know, this you might have a problem where you'll get other groups trying to piggyback onto your proposal, and that's why I tried to put into the text a provision which specifies the fact that anti-Semitism stands by itself. There may well be other groups, whether they're Kurds or whatever, or Uyghurs, that deserve some type of international instrument that will deal with actions against them. But that shouldn't be added onto or shouldn't affect a convention criminalizing anti-Semitism. But it doesn't mean that any of the other phobias or issues are less important. It's just anti-Semitism is unique. It's historical. It goes back hundreds and thousands of years, and therefore it stands alone and should be dealt with alone.
Yes, Fiamma, you have closing remarks before we turn to Ambassador Baker for his final thoughts?
No, I actually think that this is a great idea. I think that we must really be prepared to present it, to find a way that it will be presented at the United Nations. So this is our next step, and that we have to adjourn to update this very important document with one issue, which is just the Israelization of anti-Semitism nowadays. I mean, that's a real point that has been changing all along the years. That's the main and almost only subject is this. All the rest is connected to this. It derives from it.
Yeah.
It's connected to the terrible attack that from every side has been brought to Israel since the time of the Soviet Union onward, and has been passed to the movements for so-called human rights, and has become the lead in the United Nations and its agencies, and also, unfortunately, also in the European Union. So we have to have two different approaches, and we have to present it, Alan, if you agree, not only to the European Union, to the United Nations, but also to the European Union, maybe preparing a particular kind of document that will be fit also for the European Union.
Yeah, well, clearly we need to build up an international lobby that wouldn't be afraid. Unlike in 2015, they wouldn't be afraid of taking this and advancing it. I attended the infamous Durban conference in 2001, and I was in very difficult positions, because when I used to walk in the morning outside the hotel, there were huge demonstrations demonstrating against me, both as an Israeli and as a Jew, and the NGO section of the Durban conference, the acts that they adopted were openly anti-Semitic, and they refused to include anti-Semitism in any of the provisions referring to various kinds of racism.
Alan, I also was there, and as a journalist, and to my astonished newspaper, I told all the story of how something that should have been the United Nations anti-racism conference became the racist conference against Israel. And I remember that we were actually running away from anti-Semitic aggressive crowds that were running after any Jew that was around there. And certainly you were part of the...
Well, Israel and the Americans, ultimately, we walked out of that conference halfway through out of disgust. and we flew home. So you know, there's a long memory of complaints that we have, and now is the time to bring them to the fore.
Yes, we quite agree, Alan, and we want to thank you very much for this extraordinary, informative, insightful session. We were going to have to end now, as we promised our viewers to take no more than 45 minutes of their time, but we can turn part of this into a brief by Ambassador Alan Baker that we can put parts of it, you know, certainly we can publish it on our website and send it out to our email list, which we invite everyone to join. Our email list, which we send out, you know, our weekly briefs. And certainly this is an initiative that we are going to pursue. It's a perfect time. And thank you for your moral clarity and your entrepreneurial, intellectual and moral entrepreneurship. This is what the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs is here to do, is to move from defense to offense on the legal battlefield as well. Israel too long has played on the defense battlefield, trying to explain itself, and is now going to move to the offensive battlefield in order to expose, uncover, and prosecute its enemies, not only on the military battlefield, but on the diplomatic and legal battlefield. So Ambassador Baker, allow us to thank you very, very much for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you in the office and sitting in your office as you continue to lead the way towards you know, our Israel's legal rights and moral clarity, as you always have been so clear on these issues. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.